I stood there, the cold rain soaking through my clothes as the door slammed shut behind me. My son's voice echoed in the distance. You need to learn humility, Mom. Humility? After everything I sacrificed, after all I gave them, I was left out in the storm like a stranger. But then, through the downpour, I saw him, James Holt, stepping out of the shadows, a silent promise of protection in his eyes. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The room smelled of rosemary chicken and dry Chardonnay, but the taste in Evelyn Carter's mouth was metallic. Something sharp, something wrong. She sat at the end of a long dining table in her son's Charleston home, her napkin folded neatly in her lap, posture proud despite the slight ache in her spine. The chandelier overhead cast sterile light on the polished mahogany, but there was no warmth in it. Not anymore. Mark was speaking, bragging, more like, about a new investment deal, how the client finally learned who was in charge. His voice, always just a pitch too loud, thundered through the room like he owned not just the house, but the people in it. And then I told him, you either play by my rules or you don't play at all. Simple. Vanessa let out a laugh that sounded rehearsed. Evelyn kept her voice calm. You ever stop to ask why people won't stay in business with you? The silverware paused. Mark's eyes slid toward her. A thin smile stretched across his lips. You come into my home and question how I do business? Evelyn didn't flinch. I came to have dinner with my family. Vanessa's wine glass touched her lips, but her eyes never left Evelyn. You came to criticize. That's all you do lately. Bethany looked down, chewing slowly, pretending her chicken needed that much attention. Not a single glance in her mother's direction. Evelyn swallowed hard. I didn't raise you all to behave like strangers. Mark scoffed. You didn't raise anyone past age 10. After Dad died, you just threw yourself into that company of yours. Don't act like a saint now. That landed hard. Evelyn's fingers tensed against the stem of her glass. She didn't reply. Not yet. The silence roared around them, broken only by the tap of rain now gathering momentum outside. Vanessa set her napkin down deliberately. Maybe this is exactly what she needs. A reminder that respect is earned, not inherited. Mark stood, his chair scraping back against the floor. You want to question how things are run here? He said, walking to the coat rack near the door. Fine. Walk home. Reflect on it. He yanked her raincoat off the hook and tossed it across the table. It landed in front of her like a dead animal. Bethany whispered something, but no one heard. Evelyn stood slowly, steadying herself with the back of her chair. No one offered to help. Her cane leaned against the wall behind her, untouched. She reached for the coat, fingers brushing the damp fabric. It was cold. Vanessa didn't bother to hide her smirk. Storm's really coming down out there. Evelyn's lips parted, maybe to say something, maybe not. But Mark was already pulling open the door. The wind rushed in like judgment. Figure out how to get home, he said, stepping aside. The porch was slick, rain blowing sideways, the sky dark as tar. Evelyn stepped out, drawing the coat tightly around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of mothballs and betrayal. Behind her, the door shut with a deep thunk, sealing her out. Her shoes slipped slightly on the wet tile as she moved forward, her cane tapping ahead of her in cautious rhythm. Her bones ached, her heart thundered not with fear but with something colder, disbelief, and then grief. It wasn't just that they shut her out, it was how easily they'd done it, like she was some artifact they'd outgrown. Something inconvenient. She made it to the edge of the porch. No one followed. No one called out. No apology. no umbrella. Just rain, and a city that had changed with the people she once called her own. Thunder cracked overhead as she reached the top step. She nearly missed the headlights, sleek, steady, and unmoving across the street. A black SUV sat there, engine idling. Too clean, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. Her eyes narrowed. The driver's side door opened. A figure stepped out, tall and broad, his silhouette cutting clean through the storm. The downpour hadn't let up, and Evelyn could feel it seeping into the seams of her shoes as she stood at the edge of the porch, her shoulders curved beneath the weight of cold betrayal. Wind tangled her damp hair around her face, and her coat, poorly fastened and clinging to her in all the wrong places, felt less like warmth and more like surrender. The silence behind the closed front door echoed louder than the rain. Across the street, headlights remained steady, unwavering through the storm. She squinted through the downpour, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, there was a shape now. A man stepping out from the SUV, his movements deliberate and unhurried, as if the storm had made an agreement to leave him untouched. The figure walked toward her with the kind of authority that wasn't loud or showy. It simply was. His long coat billowed slightly as he crossed the pavement, boots sure against the slick concrete. Evelyn recognized the gait before she saw his face, and something in her chest, the part that had been bracing for collapse, steadied. James Holt didn't speak as he approached. He didn't need to. His presence alone cut through the chaos with the kind of calm you only ever felt after everything else had gone wrong. In one hand, he carried a thick wool coat, dark gray and dry despite the rain. Without a word, he stepped onto the porch, gently lifted Evelyn's limp shoulders, and draped the new coat over her like an oath being made. It was heavier than hers, lined with something warm, and carried the faintest scent of cedar and cologne. She didn't resist. She didn't even look away from him as he adjusted the collar for her and pulled the front closed with careful hands. Inside the house, a movement in the window caught James's eye. Vanessa stood behind the sheer curtain, frozen in place. Her eyes locked on James for a split second before she stepped back like she'd seen a ghost. The curtain fell shut, concealing her, but not the panic that had flared across her face. "Are you ready to go?" James asked softly, his tone level, not pressing. His voice held no judgment, only protection, and Evelyn, for the first time that evening, felt like someone still saw her. She nodded once, her chin barely moving, but it was enough. He didn't offer her his arm, but he walked beside her, letting her lean on the rhythm of his steps instead of the fragility in her bones. Together they descended the slick porch steps, her cane tapping cautiously against each one as they went. Inside the house, Mark had joined Vanessa at the window. His arms were crossed, jaw tight as he tried to make sense of the man outside. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, watching the way James stayed close to Evelyn, his movements so precise, it felt military. The SUV door opened smoothly, revealing a clean leather interior and warm light that spilled out onto the wet street. Evelyn stepped inside with measured dignity, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the doorframe. James followed, but not before pausing to survey the house behind them. Neighbors were beginning to take notice. A porch light flicked on 2 houses down. Another curtain shifted to the side. Someone across the street stepped onto their front stoop and stood under the awning, watching the scene unfold like it was a neighborhood play no one had rehearsed for. Charleston didn't scream. It whispered. But tonight, those whispers were taking notes. Once inside the vehicle, James shut the door firmly behind him. The warmth wrapped around Evelyn instantly, fogging the windows as the driver pulled the SUV smoothly away from the curb. Mark and Vanessa stood motionless behind the glass, their figures distorted by the rain-streaked window. Neither of them moved. As the car turned the corner and disappeared into the mist, James leaned forward slightly and tapped his earpiece. His voice was quiet but firm. "She's in. Let's begin." The interior of the SUV felt like another world, one carved out of silence, heat, and safety. The storm outside smeared against the tinted windows like a forgotten memory. Evelyn sat back against the leather seat, hands folded tightly in her lap, her breath still shallow, not yet trusting the calm that wrapped itself around her like the coat James had placed on her shoulders. Her skin prickled as it began to warm, nerves adjusting to the contrast between wet clothes and dry air. The vehicle moved smoothly through Charleston's tree-lined streets, the hum of the tires and the soft swish of the windshield wipers filling the space where words had not yet come. James sat beside her, angled just enough to keep an eye on her without crowding her. He didn't speak at first. He let the silence settle the way only someone trained in restraint could. No rush, no need to fill it with noise. He understood that some silences weren't empty. They were full of bruises. Finally, Evelyn exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They didn't even blink," she said quietly, her voice thin but steady. "It was like I was a stranger on their porch." James didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into the front pocket of his coat and pulled out a small cloth, holding it out to her without a word. Evelyn hesitated, then took it and dabbed the rain from her cheeks and forehead, more out of habit than anything else. She caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her lipstick had faded, hair clung wet to her temple. And her eyes, those sharp, steady eyes that once stared down corporate boards and tax attorneys, looked unsure for the first time in years. "I kept thinking Bethany would stop them," she said, "that she'd say something. Anything." "She's quiet," James said gently. "Quiet doesn't always mean safe." Evelyn nodded slowly, folding the cloth neatly in her lap. The SUV made a slow turn, the glow from a passing streetlight illuminating the profile of James's face, sharp-jawed, scarred just faintly near the temple, unreadable as ever. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. It wasn't accusation, it was awe. Gratitude. "You called," James replied. "I answer when you call. Always have." His words settled between them like truth spoken aloud for the first time. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," she said, her voice dipping lower. James shook his head, just once. "You didn't drag me anywhere. I've been following from a distance for a while now. Watching the way they treat you." He paused, "Waiting for you to stop giving them the benefit of the doubt." Evelyn looked away, eyes drifting out the rain-slicked window. The homes passed by like ghosts, soft porch lights glowing behind trimmed hedges, warm windows hiding God knows what. "They're my children," she whispered, more to herself than him. "No matter what they've become." "They may be your children," James said, voice calm but firm. "But children don't leave their mother in the rain." His words were a clean cut, not cruel, not unkind, just precise. Evelyn let them hang there, and in that quiet moment something inside her began to shift. It wasn't sudden. It didn't come with fireworks or declarations. It came the way resolve always did, with slow, heavy understanding. She turned back toward him and met his eyes fully for the first time since stepping into the vehicle. "I don't want them near me, not until I decide what happens next." James nodded once. No smile, no reaction beyond a subtle tension easing in his shoulders. He pressed a button near the center console. "Redirect to the firm," he told the driver. As the SUV curved off toward the business district, Evelyn sat straighter in her seat. The coat still held his warmth, but now, her own had started to return. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Evelyn stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the 6th floor. The firm's name, Price and Wallace LLP, was etched in gold lettering across a frosted glass door at the far end. Rain still clung to the edges of her coat, but her steps no longer faltered. James followed 2 paces behind, silent and alert, like a shadow with a heartbeat. He hadn't asked what the meeting was about. He didn't need to. He was there to protect, not pry. Linda Price's office smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, a comforting mix of age and intention. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with legal volumes, framed certificates, and a few personal touches. A ceramic mug from her alma mater, a photo of her dog, a sleek brass nameplate on her desk that read simply, Linda Price, partner. Linda herself stood as Evelyn entered, her gray blazer pressed, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't offer pity, just professionalism wrapped in steel. "You look like you've had the kind of night that makes the morning feel like a lifetime away," Linda said gently. "I have," Evelyn replied, smoothing her coat as she sat across from her. "And I don't want to waste any more of it." Linda nodded and pulled a thick leather folder from her briefcase. She opened it slowly, laying it out like a final chapter waiting to be written. "I've updated your estate documents per our last conversation," she said, sliding the first page forward. "Mark and Vanessa are removed entirely. Everything goes to the local hospital's oncology fund, per your wishes. Bethany remains your contingent beneficiary on liquid assets and personal items." Evelyn scanned the papers with steady eyes. The pages felt heavier than paper should, each line etched with the weight of decisions she could no longer avoid. Her pen hovered over the signature line, then pressed down with slow, certain ink. The scratch of the pen was the only sound in the room for several seconds. Linda flipped to the next page. Power of attorney, medical proxy, advance directives. Everything locked in, airtight. They can't touch it, any of it. Evelyn signed again. There was no ceremony to it, no drama, just ink and paper and consequence. When they were finished, Linda slid the folder back into her case and leaned forward, hands clasped. "You're not the first client I've had whose children turned greedy, but you might be the first who didn't wait until it was too late." Evelyn smiled faintly, not with pride, but with clarity. "They've mistaken my silence for surrender." "They'll find out soon enough," Linda replied, "and they'll have no legal ground to stand on when they do." Outside the office window, the storm had begun to lighten. The rain hadn't stopped completely, but it had softened, trailing across the glass in lazy streaks. Below, the streets of downtown Charleston shimmered with neon and wet pavement. Evelyn rose from the chair slowly, her hands brushing over the lapels of her coat. She stood straighter now, taller, not in height, but in presence, as though the weight she carried had shifted to her spine instead of her shoulders. "I have one more request," she said, turning back toward Linda. "If either of them calls this office pretending to be me, you hang up." Linda raised a brow. "I'll do better than that. I'll forward the call to James." Evelyn allowed herself a quiet laugh, short and dry, but real. She reached across the desk and clasped Linda's hand for a brief moment. "Thank you for being exactly who I needed." As she stepped back into the hallway, James stood from the lobby bench, straightening his coat, eyes flicking instinctively to her hands, her face, her posture. "All good?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's go." The two of them walked in, stepped down the hall, past framed oil paintings and firm-wide awards. The office had emptied out, but Evelyn's heels clicked against the polished floor with a new kind of rhythm, measured, defiant, unshakable. As the elevator doors slid open, Evelyn stepped in first. She didn't look back. The bells of St. Helena's struck 10, their echo lacing through the warm Sunday air like something sacred. The old church, with its white steeple and creeping ivy, stood in quiet defiance of the modern world around it, timeless, polished, and watching. Families arrived in their pressed pastels, hymnals tucked under arms, heels clicking on worn brick. Evelyn stepped out of the black SUV, one gloved hand gripping the crook of James's elbow as she steadied herself on the curb. Her heels, navy, polished and 2 inches tall, didn't wobble. Her posture didn't falter. She wore a slate gray dress, high-necked and unbothered by the morning heat, her pearl earrings catching the sun in sharp glints. James walked beside her with the kind of presence that made people pause without knowing why. Tailored black suit, earpiece in, eyes constantly moving, clocking angles no one else saw. He opened the church doors with one hand, letting her pass through first, and nodded faintly to the usher. Inside, heads turned. Subtly, quietly. But they turned. Not because Evelyn Carter was at church. She always came. But this time, she wasn't walking in alone. Whispers followed behind her like a hymn's second verse. She brought someone with her. That's security, isn't it? Something must have happened. Evelyn walked with unbothered grace, her hand lightly brushing the pew as she made her way down the center aisle. She didn't seek out anyone's gaze, but her chin was lifted, her spine straight. She wasn't hiding. From the third pew, Vanessa's expression twisted the moment she saw them. Dressed in a blush pink wrap dress and too much perfume, she leaned into Mark and whispered with a venom-sweet smile, "Who hires protection from their own family?" Evelyn heard it. She didn't react. Her lips didn't even tighten. She simply stepped forward, nodded at the pastor standing near the pulpit, and took her usual seat near the front, hands folded in her lap like nothing had changed. But everything had. Mark sat further back, arms crossed, jaw flexing as his eyes bored holes into James's back. He hadn't stood when Evelyn passed. He hadn't even nodded. James had noticed, of course. He noticed everything, but offered nothing in return except the calm, quiet threat of his presence. The organ music began, gentle and soaring. The congregation stood. Evelyn sang, voice low but sure, a steady alto that matched the rhythm of the moment. James didn't sing. He stood just behind her, right shoulder to the aisle, hands clasped at his waist, one eye always on the back rows. Halfway through the third verse, Evelyn felt a touch on her elbow. She turned slightly, and there was Bethany, her daughter's eyes cautious, tentative. "Mom," Bethany whispered, "are you okay?" Evelyn studied her daughter for a moment longer than necessary. Bethany's voice was small, but not insincere. Still, Evelyn had learned to hear the gaps in things, what wasn't said, what wasn't done. "I'm fine," she said softly. "But thank you for asking." Bethany looked like she wanted to say more, but the hymn ended and the congregation sat again. She retreated without a word, slipping back into the row beside Vanessa like she'd never left. The sermon was about boundaries. Biblical, yes. But Evelyn listened with sharper ears. The way the pastor spoke of discernment, of walking away from what harms you without hatred in your heart, felt too perfectly timed to be coincidence. When the service ended and the doors opened wide again, Evelyn and James waited for the crowd to exit before stepping out. The courtyard bustled with handshakes, gossip, and the scent of lemon balm and aftershave. Mark avoided them. Vanessa, however, made a point of walking past close enough to be seen, but far enough to pretend it was unintentional. She smiled. "You look rested, Evelyn," she said. "I suppose that's what happens when you hire bodyguards to manage your stress." Evelyn didn't take the bait. She offered a simple, serene nod. "Good morning, Vanessa." And then she turned her back on her, just as James leaned in toward Evelyn's ear, his voice low, carefully modulated. "Your bank flagged 2 attempts last night," he murmured. "Mark tried to access your accounts." Evelyn stilled, breath caught mid-step. The storm hadn't passed. It had just gone quiet. The file was already waiting on Linda's desk when Evelyn arrived Monday morning. This time, there were no pleasantries, just the low buzz of a coffee machine humming from the break room, the tap of James's shoes pacing outside the glass door, and the quiet click of the folder opening. Linda slid it forward, her lips pressed into a line so tight it barely looked human. Wellsman Savings flagged 2 unauthorized login attempts. One yesterday at 10:32 p.m. The other this morning just after 6. Both pinged from Mark's home IP address. Evelyn's eyes didn't widen. They narrowed. Her hand, resting on the table beside the folder, trembled once before she stilled it. "Did they get in?" she asked, voice low. Linda shook her head. "No, they didn't get past the security prompts, but they tried. Both times using your birth date and your old pet's name." "The golden retriever I had when I was 30, Evelyn said flatly. "He barely even remembers that dog." "He remembers what he thinks he's entitled to," Linda replied, "but your accounts are fully protected. We've layered legal alerts on top of the bank's firewalls. If he tries again, he'll trip a federal wiretap." For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Her gaze dropped to the folder again, then to the steam rising from the ceramic mug in front of her. She reached for it with both hands, as if anchoring herself to something solid. "He was always ambitious," she said finally, "but he wasn't always cruel." Linda exhaled, leaned back in her chair. "Grief turns some people inward. Others, it makes them dangerous." Evelyn nodded slowly, the words sitting with her. "Well," she said, placing the mug down with gentle precision, "I'm not here to nurse anyone through that kind of grief." Back at the house, the scent of cinnamon and butter wafted through the kitchen. The mixer hummed, quiet and steady, as Evelyn cracked the final egg into the bowl. It had been years since she baked anything from scratch, but her hands remembered the motion, the weight of the whisk, the rhythm of folding, the heat of the oven when it clicked to life. Outside the bay window, James stood talking with one of his team members near the driveway, both of them keeping their voices low and their eyes alert. Evelyn glanced at them only once before returning to the batter. They were watching. So was she, just differently. The knock came mid-morning, not on the door, but in the form of a ping on her phone, a text, from Bethany. "Have you seen what Vanessa posted?" Evelyn dried her hands and opened the link. Vanessa's social media post was public. A picture of a wine glass on her marble counter, a selfie with dramatic under-eye concealer, and a caption in cursive script. "When people become paranoid and hire bodyguards from their own family, you realize mental decline is real. Prayers for healing. Elder care matters. Just sad but true." Evelyn stared at it for a long time, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her chest burned, not with sadness, but with the insult of how casually cruelty could be repackaged as concern. She didn't reply. She didn't share it. She simply placed the phone face down on the counter and went back to piping dough onto the baking sheet. By the time James returned from outside, the kitchen smelled like every safe memory Evelyn had left. He stepped in, took one long breath, and arched a brow. "You're baking." "I am," she said simply, not looking up from the tray. "You and your team, do any of them like oatmeal raisin?" James cracked the faintest smile. "We're trained not to answer questions that divisive." "Tell them to suck it up," she said, sliding the sheet into the oven. That afternoon, a Charleston neighborhood Facebook group lit up. One neighbor had commented on Vanessa's post, then another. Within the hour, the tide had turned. Evelyn Carter was one of the first donors to the library restoration project. She drove herself to chemo appointments in '09, never asked for help. She bakes. For people who protect her? Maybe try that sometime. Evelyn didn't post a word. She just folded a crisp white dish towel over the cooling rack and made sure every cookie went into a box lined with wax paper and ribbon. By evening, the house was quiet again. James sat by the front window reading. Evelyn poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea and handed one to him without a word. She settled into the chair opposite him, calm, collected. James looked over the rim of his mug and spoke softly. They're slipping, Evelyn. First the accounts. Now the lies. This is the part where people get careless. Evelyn sipped her tea, eyes distant but deliberate. Let them. The hum of static quieted, replaced by a low, compressed click. Then a voice, clear as glass. Once we get the paperwork started, it'll move fast. Trust me, I've done my research. The audio fed through a pair of headphones placed neatly on Evelyn's antique writing desk. Her study, normally lit with warm lamplight and scented faintly of rosemary and paper, felt cold today. No candles, no music. Just her, James, and a truth too sharp to look at directly. She sat upright, her fingers pressed lightly to her temples, eyes closed as Vanessa's voice continued in her ear. By the time she realizes what's happening, we'll already have the psychiatric consult submitted. Declaring her incompetent is easier than people think when you know what to say, and who to say it to. There was the soft clink of ceramic, likely a coffee mug. Then Mark's voice joined, heavy with disdain. She's paranoid, emotional, and unstable. That's enough for a preliminary hearing. We get control of the finances first, then the house. Once the conservatorship is in place, it's ours. All of it. Silence. Then laughter. Vanessa's. And still, Evelyn didn't speak. James leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching her. The small surveillance recorder, about the size of a deck of cards, sat on the desk beside her mug of untouched tea. He had waited until the file was triple encrypted, verified, and legal before he'd handed it over. No mistakes. No leaks. The conversation had taken place that morning in a boutique cafe on King Street. Just 3 tables, concrete floors, no background music. Perfect audio. Evelyn pressed pause. For a long moment she stared at nothing. The room around her stood still, as though waiting for permission to move again. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and controlled. Do they really believe I'm that easy to erase? No, James said from across the room. But they're desperate enough to try. Evelyn reached for her tea and took a slow sip. It had gone cold. She didn't flinch. They've underestimated me for years, she murmured. I wonder if that's more comfortable than seeing me clearly. James stepped forward, picked up the recorder, and slipped it back into its case. They've played their hand, he said, and we caught every card. Evelyn stood, her spine tall even in the face of betrayal this deliberate. Send it to Linda. She's waiting, James replied, already dialing. By the time Evelyn entered Linda Price's office that afternoon, the legal machine had begun to turn. Faster than it had when Mark tried to steal her money. Faster than it had when Vanessa posted online. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about annihilation. Linda's face was set, her mouth a hard line as she slid a printout across the desk. I've drafted preliminary injunctions, one for Mark, one for Vanessa. They can't legally present psychiatric claims without court approval. And we're filing for a protective order to make sure they can't touch a single document related to your medical history. Evelyn took the pages in hand, flipping through them slowly. The words were clean, sharp, purposeful. Her name appeared at the top of each one, still hers, still intact. They're not going to stop, Evelyn said. No, Linda replied, but neither are we. There was a brief pause, and then Linda leaned forward, her voice a little lower. You know, Evelyn, most people in your position would have fallen apart by now. I did, Evelyn said plainly, just not where anyone could see. That evening, as twilight poured gold across the edge of the study window, Evelyn sat alone at her desk once again. The legal documents were signed, sealed, and waiting in James's briefcase. But Evelyn didn't move. Instead, she reached into the drawer, pulled out an old photo of Mark, age 10, cheeks flushed, standing beside his father after a little league game. She looked at it long enough to feel the ache bloom. Then she turned it over and slid it back into the drawer. Her past was real, but it would not protect them. The courthouse steps were slick from early rain, the kind that left the stone gleaming under the late morning sun. Evelyn stood still for a moment at the base of them, one gloved hand resting lightly on James's arm as she looked up at the building's wide columns and grim symmetry. "I remember when this place felt like it worked against people like me," she murmured. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply kept pace beside her, every inch of him alert, coat buttoned high, jaw locked, earpiece in place. Inside, the hallway was too cold. It always was. Marble floors, buzzing fluorescents, a faint scent of bleach and old paperwork. Evelyn walked with her chin lifted, her pace slow but deliberate. She wore navy again, this time a tailored skirt suit that caught the light as she moved. Her silver hair swept into a knot at the base of her neck. No jewelry today, no softness. Linda met them outside courtroom B12. She handed Evelyn a slim folder, no words exchanged. Everything had already been discussed. Everything was ready. From the other end of the hallway, Vanessa's voice rang out like a bell with a crack in it. "Oh, look at her! Still playing the victim. Can't even walk into a courtroom without an escort." James didn't flinch, but Evelyn stopped. Just for a second. She turned her head slowly toward the sound and met Vanessa's gaze without blinking. Vanessa faltered first, shifting her purse from one shoulder to the other as if that might make her feel taller. Mark stood behind her, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. Evelyn didn't say a word. She just turned back and stepped into the courtroom. Inside, the room was quiet, sterile, beige, filled with the low shuffling of attorneys flipping through files. A bailiff called for silence as the judge entered, and everyone rose. Evelyn sat in the front row, between Linda and James. James didn't break his posture even once. Eyes forward, spine straight, hands relaxed, but ready. Mark's attorney began with a thin, almost rehearsed summary. Concerns about Evelyn's cognitive condition, her mental clarity, her increasing paranoia. He spoke as though reading a diagnosis rather than an accusation. Vanessa sat beside him, arms crossed tightly, her smile frozen and wide. Her eyes, though, darted toward Evelyn, toward James, toward the judge. Linda stood when the judge nodded her in. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. She began by presenting Evelyn's clean bill of health from her primary care physician. Then, a notarized record of her estate changes, signed, witnessed, time-stamped. And then she placed a small speaker on the table and pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room, unmistakable. "She's paranoid, emotional, and unstable. That's enough for a preliminary hearing. We get control of the finances first, then the house." There was a beat of silence after the clip ended. The judge adjusted his glasses. His eyes moved to Mark. "That your voice, Mr. Carter?" Mark shifted. "That recording was taken without my—" "It was recorded in a public establishment," Linda cut in calmly, "which state law allows." The judge nodded. "And it was reviewed by this court ahead of today's hearing, along with the IP logs from Wellsman Savings, confirming multiple unauthorized attempts to access the plaintiff's financial accounts." Vanessa visibly swallowed. James never moved. The judge leaned back in his chair. "This is a courtroom, not a playground for inheritance squabbles. I see no evidence of mental incompetence. What I do see is manipulation, financial coercion, and an alarming level of entitlement." His gavel came down like thunder. Petition denied. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was buzzing, quietly, but intensely. Attorneys whispered in corners. A local reporter from the Charleston Register typed something into her phone near the vending machines. Vanessa was pacing. Mark had gone still. Evelyn didn't gloat. She didn't smile. But she did stop at the door, just for a moment. Enough to feel the shift. Power, real power, didn't need to announce itself. It just walked through walls people thought were permanent. James opened the door for her, and she stepped into the light of a brightening day. The Charleston Register landed on front porches just before 7 the next morning. Folded neatly, ink still fresh, it was Evelyn's name that took the second column above the fold. Court rejects conservatorship attempt against local philanthropist. Subheader: Judge calls move, financial coercion, not concern. By 8, it had been passed from stoop to screen, shared in group chats, and clipped to corkboards at cafes. The photo wasn't perfect. Evelyn exiting the courthouse with James beside her, chin lifted, jaw set. But it didn't need to be. The caption beneath it carried more weight than the image ever could. Carter's family petition denied amid claims of manipulation, fraud attempt. Vanessa saw it first, her phone lighting up as she poured coffee. She scrolled the article in 3 panicked swipes, her thumb trembling slightly. They quoted the judge, she muttered, breath catching. They actually quoted him. Mark didn't respond. He stood across the kitchen, silent, still wearing last night's shirt. He hadn't slept. Neither of them had. She made us look like we were looting a hospice, Vanessa snapped. And the neighbors. God, they're going to run with this. She wasn't wrong. By 10 a.m., the neighborhood buzz had already begun. A woman at the corner lot waved a little too brightly. A dog walker who usually crossed the street now stayed on their side. A man with a rake offered only a tight-lipped nod. Vanessa pulled the curtains halfway shut. Back at Evelyn's house, the kitchen smelled of orange peel and sage. She stood at the sink, drying the last of the teacups when the doorbell rang. Bethany. Not texting, not calling. Here. She stood on the porch, dressed in jeans and a soft gray cardigan, her eyes puffy, her shoulders small. Evelyn didn't rush to open the door. She looked through the peephole for a long moment, then slowly turned the knob. "Hi, Mom," Bethany said, voice catching. "Can I come in?" Evelyn stepped aside wordlessly, and Bethany entered like someone unsure of where she stood, head bowed, hands clasped. "I saw the paper," she said. I'm so sorry. For not saying something sooner. For not stopping them." Evelyn studied her daughter carefully, then reached for her hand and squeezed it. "You didn't stop them. But you didn't join them either." Bethany blinked, eyes shining. "I wanted to. I froze." Evelyn nodded. "Now you're here." They hugged, and for a moment, the weight between them lifted, just enough to breathe. Still, Evelyn held a part of herself back. Forgiveness didn't have to mean forgetting. The knock at the back door came 30 minutes later. This time, it was not gentle. James was already moving before Evelyn could react. Stepping into the sunroom with the ease of a man who had been expecting trouble. Mark shoved open the rear screen door before James could block it. His jaw clenched, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot with fury and panic. He looked less like a man, and more like a threat unraveling at the seams. "You think this is funny?" Mark barked. "You think humiliating me in court makes you untouchable?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood in the threshold between the kitchen and the hall, Bethany just behind her. "You humiliated yourself," she said evenly. "I just didn't stop you." James placed himself between them, one hand raised slightly, a silent warning. Mark tried to step forward again, but James's voice cut in, smooth and unshaken. "That's far enough." "Get out of my way," Mark growled. "You're trespassing," James said, "and escalating. I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." There was a pause, the kind that made a room go still, and then James added, voice lower now, meant only for Evelyn's ears. "We found something. It's bigger than we thought." Evelyn's eyes flicked to him. He nodded once, subtle. "Hidden accounts. Offshore routing. Loans in Mark's name tied to shell companies. He's not just broke. He's drowning. And he's been lying about it for years. Mark's voice cracked through the tension. You want to play games? Fine, you'll regret it. But Evelyn didn't answer. Her eyes never left James's. He didn't blink. Neither did she. By Wednesday morning, the file on Mark Carter's financial history was thicker than Evelyn expected, and colder than she could have imagined. Linda slid the folder across her desk in silence. The sound it made, paper brushing polished oak, somehow landed heavier than any gavel. 36 credit lines, 9 business loans, 4 failed shell companies registered out of Delaware, Nevada, and the Caymans, she said, flipping pages. 3 separate notices of default, and as of last Friday, 2 properties headed for foreclosure. Evelyn didn't speak. She just scanned the documents slowly, eyes moving from line item to line item, her fingertips resting at the edge of the page like she was afraid of smudging the truth. James stood at the window, arms folded, silent as ever. He'd seen it already. He knew the numbers by heart, but Linda had insisted Evelyn read them herself. He's been moving debt around for years, Linda said. Vanessa doesn't even have access to half of it. My guess is she's only just beginning to understand how deep he's buried them. Evelyn exhaled, not with surprise, but with confirmation. Some part of her had suspected. You don't raise someone like Mark and miss the tremor beneath the charm. You just spend too long hoping it's only a tremor. She closed the folder gently. Let them feel it. Back at Mark and Vanessa's house, the yelling started before James's car pulled out of the driveway. You lied to me, Mark. Vanessa's voice shrieked through the hallway, shrill and glass-edged. You told me we were fine. You told me the Charleston condo was paid off. Mark slammed a door somewhere upstairs. It was, until you started bleeding money on renovations and handbags and influencer crap we didn't need. I was building our brand, you idiot. We were supposed to look stable while you worked on it. I was working on it, he shouted back. You think I wanted to live off loans? You think this was the plan? Vanessa's laugh cracked apart. You wanted to bury your mother. That was the plan. There was a beat of silence, thick, too heavy to breathe through. Then, the unmistakable sound of something crashing to the floor. A glass, maybe, a plate. Followed by heavy, unsteady footsteps. Vanessa opened the front door and walked out with her phone in hand and her wedding ring clenched in the other. She didn't look back. Evelyn stood on her back patio, a cup of chamomile cooling in her hand, eyes trained on the ivy climbing the fence. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the yard. She didn't look at James when he approached, but she felt his presence like a tide arriving. It's confirmed, he said, handing her a manila envelope. Foreclosure on the Charlotte property and the condo near Colonial Lake. Notices are dated. They go public next week. Evelyn took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside were copies, black and white, no fanfare, just inked judgment, dates, dollar signs, proof. Her gaze never wavered. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Thank you, she said. James nodded, then stepped back to the edge of the patio, giving her space. But the silence didn't last long. Behind her, a soft gasp, wet, quiet, involuntary. Bethany. She had stepped outside just in time to catch the final page. Mark's name typed in bold across a foreclosure notice, the debt column stretching halfway down the sheet. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. How long? Evelyn turned to her slowly. Years. Bethany sank down onto the patio bench, her hands trembling. He told me he was investing, that the accounts were just leveraged. He said it was temporary, that everything was temporary. Everything was temporary, Evelyn said gently. He just didn't realize what that meant. Bethany looked up at her, face flushed and pale all at once. I believed him. I, I defended him to people. Even to you. Evelyn sat beside her, folding her coat tighter around her shoulders. We choose different paths now, she said, but that doesn't mean we don't remember where they forked. Bethany leaned into her, and for a moment, neither spoke. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because the silence finally felt honest. By Friday, James's team had doubled the perimeter coverage on Evelyn's property. The cameras, discreet but state-of-the-art, had been installed at dawn, angled carefully to cover every blind spot. The garage, the back gate, the side walkway, where an unfamiliar footprint had shown up 2 nights earlier. Motion-activated lighting now lined the fence, and a new keypad had been installed at the front door, disguised inside a vintage brass panel that matched the home's aesthetic. Evelyn never asked how fast they moved. She just poured coffee in a fresh pot every morning and let them work. They never had to protect me before, she said once to Bethany, who had taken up quiet residence in the upstairs guest room. But now that they do, I'm realizing I should have asked for help a long time ago. James didn't comment. He simply nodded from the hallway and checked the battery life on the surveillance grid. The run-in happened Saturday morning in the produce section of Elliott's Market on Queen Street. Evelyn was reaching for blood oranges when she heard heels, sharp, impatient, approaching from behind. She didn't have to turn. She recognized the perfume first, a harsh mix of bergamot and sugar. Vanessa. You think this is over? She hissed, too close behind Evelyn's ear. You think you've won because you embarrassed us in court? Evelyn set a single orange in her cart and finally turned, her face unreadable. I don't think I've won anything. Vanessa's expression flickered, like she'd expected a slap, and instead received silence. You're not untouchable, she snapped. People forget. Courts shift. All it takes is one mistake. Before Evelyn could respond, not that she looked inclined to, James appeared from the next aisle, a head taller, presence firm but quiet. Back away, he said simply. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me? He stepped forward once, not threatening, not loud, but immovable. You just threatened a client in a public space, he said. On record, step back now, or I call it in. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came out. Her gaze flicked to a nearby couple, frozen beside a stack of avocados, watching. Then to the store clerk who had paused behind the register. She adjusted her sunglasses, indoors, and spun on her heel. The echo of her steps faded fast. James turned to Evelyn. Are you all right? She looked down at the blood orange still resting in her palm. Never better, she said. Let's check out. That afternoon, Linda filed the paperwork for a temporary restraining order against both Mark and Vanessa. The documents moved fast. Unusual for Charleston courts, but Linda had attached affidavits, audio evidence, and witness statements from the cafe and courthouse. Don't think of this as drama, she told Evelyn. Think of it as a boundary, one the law can now enforce. I don't feel dramatic, Evelyn replied. I feel clean. And she did. For the first time in what felt like a decade, the silence in her house wasn't suspicious or heavy. It was spacious. Bethany played old jazz on the kitchen speaker while unpacking a box of her books upstairs. Evelyn heard the pages fluttering, the soft clink of mugs on shelves, the sound of someone existing in the same space without tension. James stayed until twilight, checking monitors, running brief drills with his team, and coordinating schedules for overnight surveillance. When he finally stepped into the foyer to leave, Evelyn met him with a plate of still warm lemon shortbread. For your people, she said. Tell them thank you for making this house feel like a home again. James offered the ghost of a smile. They'll say it was an honor. When the door closed behind him, Evelyn didn't lock it immediately. She stood there for a while, hand on the knob, listening to the stillness. Upstairs, Bethany was laughing, softly, genuinely, at something on her phone. A sound Evelyn hadn't heard from her daughter in months, maybe longer. She turned out the porch light. The fence sensors clicked faintly in the dark, registering the motion of a squirrel or a breeze. For once, Evelyn didn't feel the need to look. She slept that night with her window cracked open. Not carelessly, but freely. But before she fell asleep, her phone buzzed once. A text from James. "We have movement on the offshore accounts. Linda will brief you in the morning." Evelyn sat across from Linda in the same downtown office where her life had shifted months ago. The quiet, familiar hum of the city outside was a reminder of how much had changed and how much still remained. This time, though, the folder on the desk didn't feel as heavy. There was no trepidation, no hesitation. She had come to settle the final matter. Linda placed the new will before her, the fresh pages glinting under the soft light. "Everything's in order," Linda said, adjusting her glasses. "Your instructions are clear. Mark and Vanessa are fully excluded, as per your wishes. Bethany and the hospital fund are the sole beneficiaries." Evelyn didn't look at the document immediately. Instead, she let her fingers hover over the top of the pages for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision before letting it sink in. "The rest goes to charity," she said, her voice calm, even. "All the foundation work, scholarships, the community outreach programs." "Done," Linda confirmed with a nod. "Everything, even the offshore assets, have been allocated. The funds can't be touched by anyone in your family, not even in the event of a challenge. The codicil to your original will is airtight." Evelyn took a steady breath, and finally her eyes met the will. The names of her children, Mark and Vanessa, were carefully excluded, their places on the list left blank. She paused only for a moment, and then, with the quiet precision of someone who had already fought too many battles, she signed her name. The pen slid across the paper with ease, not 1 ounce of uncertainty. "You've done the right thing," Linda said as she watched Evelyn sign. "They can't touch this. No judge, no lawyer, no one can override your wishes now." Evelyn set the pen down and leaned back in her chair. She felt lighter, almost weightless. Not because of the document itself, but because the weight of the past had been decisively and irrevocably lifted. For a long time she had felt as if her legacy, her children, had been a burden. Something she had to manage carefully, lest it slip from her control. Now she had taken the reins once again. But more than that, she had learned something about herself. Her heart still beat for the people she loved, but her love wasn't to be measured in sacrifice. It was to be measured in respect, in boundaries. "Where do we stand now?" Evelyn asked, her voice quieter than it had been, softer but firmer. Linda smiled, a hint of warmth in her usually reserved demeanor. "Mark and Vanessa will find out soon enough. They'll try to challenge it, maybe even in court. But they won't get far. You've already protected yourself, and everything is set. You're safe." Evelyn nodded, feeling the weight of the truth settle on her like a blanket. The game had changed. For once, her future felt like something she could control. Back at home, James was already in the foyer when she walked in, his posture steady as always. But today, there was something in his gaze that was different, a quiet approval. His eyes met hers as she passed him. "All set?" he asked, his tone low, professional. "Done," she replied. He stepped closer, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel the subtle reassurance in the air. "It's over now. They can't touch anything. They know it. And you're walking away stronger." Evelyn paused in the hallway, just long enough to take in the familiar, simple space around her. The home that had once felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary, a place she had built, and now a place she could own. She turned to face James. "Thank you for everything." He gave her a brief nod, his mouth barely curling into a smile. It was never a question of if, Evelyn. It was always a question of when you'd realize you had everything you needed. The house, quiet and still, seemed to echo his words. Everything she had fought for, everything she had built, was now irrevocable. Later that evening, Evelyn sat by the window with a glass of wine in hand, watching the sun set over the rooftops of Charleston. The house felt different now, quieter, but with a new kind of peace. Bethany was in the other room, laughing with a friend on the phone. Her voice, a sound that had been absent for so long, now filled the space like a song. Evelyn sat back in her chair, the distant hum of the city outside a reminder that life was moving, inexorably forward. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt ready. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, as Evelyn was preparing her garden for the spring. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh blooms, the kind of scent that made everything feel new again. She picked up the receiver with her hands still dirt-streaked, her voice quiet but steady. Evelyn Carter. It's Linda. Her lawyer's voice came through, crisp but laced with a note of finality. We have movement on Mark's assets. They've been seized. A court-ordered liquidation. Evelyn felt the faintest stir of satisfaction. What does that mean for him? Linda's response was succinct. It means he's broke. Everything's in the hands of the bankruptcy trustee now. Property, investments, business, gone. He doesn't even have a claim on his own earnings for the next few years. They're being redirected to pay off his creditors. Evelyn stared out over the garden, where the sunlight was just beginning to warm the earth. And Vanessa? Vanessa's gone, Linda said bluntly. She's packed up and left town. I'm sure she's already looking for a new sponsor, a new place to hide her shame. Evelyn didn't say anything at first, but the words didn't sting as they might have once. There was no relief in their absence, no satisfaction, just the soft exhale of the truth sinking in. Thank you, Linda, Evelyn finally replied, her tone cool, controlled. I'll be in touch. Later that day, when Bethany walked into the kitchen, her face was filled with quiet resolve. She set her purse down on the counter and looked at Evelyn, who was wiping her hands on a towel. You know, I never really understood what you meant by all that, about choosing different paths, Bethany said softly, her voice low yet clear. But I'm starting to get it. Evelyn smiled gently, but there was something tempered in it. I didn't expect you to understand, but I'm glad you do. Bethany hesitated before speaking again. I just wanted to thank you, Mom, for everything. You're stronger than I thought. Evelyn's gaze softened. She reached for her daughter's hand, guiding her to sit beside her at the kitchen table. You're strong too, Bethany. You just needed to see yourself that way. The evening was quieter than usual, the kind of evening that promised peace instead of tension. When James arrived, he brought with him more than his usual vigilant presence. He brought a bottle of wine, a gift, not of necessity, but of celebration. They sat down together in the dining room, the soft light of the chandelier casting warm shadows. Evelyn had never been one for grand gestures, but the simplicity of the meal was everything she needed: grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and homemade bread. For once, it felt like enough. James raised his glass to her first, to resilience, and to knowing when to let go. Evelyn clinked her glass against his, to knowing when it's time to move forward. They drank, and in the space between, Evelyn felt the weight of the past year lifting just a little more. Later, as they walked out into the cool Charleston night, James stopped on the porch steps, his expression momentarily pensive. You know, he said quietly, they'll call you a pillar of protection. In the paper, in the community, your name will be linked to that word, and it will resonate more than they can ever try to twist it. Evelyn looked out over her porch, the streetlights casting soft halos on the empty street. Let them. I've spent my life building something solid, and it wasn't just for me. The following week, Evelyn donated a large sum of her funds to rebuild several local shelters and fund educational programs for underprivileged children. The community rallied behind her as the news of her charitable work made its way through local papers. A pillar of protection, indeed, an image that had never been so perfectly crafted, nor so richly deserved. As she signed the last of the donation checks, Evelyn felt something shift again. This time, a deeper, quieter sense of peace settling inside her. Her legacy was no longer tied to her children's actions or her public image. It was tied to something far more permanent: the good she had given, the future she had secured for others. But as the evening wound down and Evelyn stood in the stillness of her home, there was an unexpected sound at the front door. Soft, tapping. It wasn't a knock, it wasn't a ring. It was the kind of sound that set your nerves on edge, making you wonder if the past had been waiting for just the right moment to come back. She opened the door slowly, and there he stood. Mark. His hair was unkempt, his eyes bloodshot and red-rimmed. He looked smaller somehow, broken in a way that Evelyn had never seen. "I need help," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Evelyn, help me. I've lost everything." Evelyn stared at Mark, his figure hunched on the doorstep, a man broken and unrecognizable from the son she once knew. His clothes were wrinkled, his face drawn, eyes sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. She hadn't seen him like this since he was a child. Knees scraped from a fall, looking up at her for comfort he never truly received. But now it was different. Now, there was nothing left to give. His voice trembled as he spoke, hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Please, Mom. I've lost everything. I'm begging you. Help me." Evelyn didn't move. The weight of the moment hung in the air like a storm, thick with the heaviness of everything unsaid. Mark was a shadow of the man who had once dominated her life, and yet here he was, standing before her like a broken child, desperate, pleading. I don't know what to do. I have nowhere to go. Vanessa left me. She took everything. Please. Please." His hands trembled at his sides as he took a step forward, but Evelyn's feet remained rooted to the floor. She could hear the desperation in his voice, the rawness, but it didn't shift her. She didn't feel pity. She didn't feel rage. She just felt nothing. The distance between them had grown so vast there was nothing left to bridge it. Mark's sobs became louder, ragged. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. For how I treated you. For everything. Please forgive me. I'll do anything." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the side, to James, who stood silently beside her. His presence was still as ever, strong but distant. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his body language said enough. He was here, unwavering, a silent promise of support. But the decision, this decision, was Evelyn's alone. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling a deep, steadying breath fill her lungs. The air outside felt colder now, but it wasn't the temperature. It was the weight of the years of hurt that had slowly piled up between them. "You left me in the rain," Evelyn said quietly, her voice steady, calm, but laced with an unmistakable finality. Mark froze, his body jerking like a marionette cut from its strings. "Mom, please, please. I was wrong. I never should have treated you like that. I don't know where to go. I have no one else. I don't want to lose you too." The words hung between them, fragile, like glass about to shatter. But Evelyn didn't reach for him. She didn't offer a word of comfort. She didn't move. "You left me in the rain," she repeated, the words falling heavier this time, with more certainty. And now you're here, asking me to take you back. But the storm's already passed. I'm standing in the sunlight now. Tears welled in Mark's eyes, but Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't soften. The door was open just enough for her to see his pain. But not enough to let him in. Not this time. James stepped forward then, just slightly, standing firm between them. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone kept Mark in place. Evelyn's heart tightened, but she didn't blink. You made your choices, Mark. You made them. And now you'll live with them. I can't fix this anymore. And you don't get to come back from everything you've done to me. Not after this. Mark's face crumpled then, the sobs taking over as his body shuddered. Mom, please, don't do this. But Evelyn already knew. She knew there was nothing left to fix. The mother who had once tried to heal him, to forgive him, was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood her own worth, one who no longer needed to carry the weight of a son who had willingly abandoned her. Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn took a step back, closing the door between them with a soft, yet resolute click. She didn't slam it. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She simply closed the door on a chapter that had run its course. Behind her, Bethany had been standing in the hallway, her face pale and uncertain. Evelyn turned to face her daughter, who took a hesitant step toward her. Mom, Bethany whispered, her voice breaking the silence like a soft tremor. Are you okay? Evelyn stood there for a long moment, looking at her daughter. The silence that filled the space was deep, but it wasn't empty. It was a silence of release, of understanding. I'm okay, Evelyn said quietly, her voice steady now. Better than I've been in years. Bethany wrapped her arms around her, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn allowed herself to lean in. She let herself feel the warmth of her daughter, the comfort of the love that had always been there, even when she couldn't see it. The weight of everything Mark had left behind, the guilt, the shame, the loss, was no longer hers to carry. She could breathe again, and for the first time in years the future felt like hers to define. The morning was crisp, the air still holding on to the last traces of a night's rain. Charleston's streets were glistening, the brick sidewalks reflecting the soft glow of the early sun as Evelyn walked beside James, her pace steady, her gaze forward. It was a walk she had taken countless times before, but today felt different. Today, the weight of the past had slipped off her shoulders, leaving behind nothing but lightness. They passed by the bakery on King Street, the aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with the damp scent of rain-soaked pavement. The old city was waking up, and so was Evelyn. She had walked these streets in the past, eyes down, avoiding the glances, the whispers, the quiet judgments. But today she noticed something new. Neighbors, people who once only nodded, now smiled at her as she passed. A woman with 2 children waved. A young couple stepped aside to let her by with a polite nod. Good morning, Mrs. Carter, an elderly man called from a nearby stoop, tipping his hat. The shift in the air was palpable. She wasn't just a woman who had once been the subject of gossip. She was a figure of respect. The kind of respect that had been earned not by wealth or status, but by strength, resilience, and, most importantly, survival. James walked beside her, his presence always reassuring, like an anchor keeping her steady. You've done well, he said softly, not looking at her but speaking to the quiet satisfaction in the air. Evelyn glanced at him, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I've done what I needed to. Back at the house, the planning for the charity event was already underway. Bethany had taken it upon herself to help organize the first major fundraiser for the shelter that Evelyn had donated to. She was running the event with energy and purpose, her confidence growing with each passing day. "Mom," Bethany said as they sat together at the kitchen table, maps of the event scattered between them. "I think we've got the guest list down, but we need one more thing: your speech. I want to make sure we get it just right." Evelyn looked at her daughter, noticing how she had changed in the past weeks. She had stopped hiding in her shell, started stepping into the world again. The quiet strength she had always carried was finally surfacing in Bethany. "I don't need to write a speech, honey," Evelyn said gently. "The truth speaks for itself." Bethany smiled, a soft but proud smile. "You're right. You've already said everything that matters." Evelyn nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's make sure we do this for them, for the ones who need us most." The final step, the one Evelyn had been waiting for, came in the form of a plain envelope, hand-delivered by Linda. "The will's final copy," Linda said, handing it over. "It's secure, locked, and filed. There's no turning back now. Everything's in place. Your wishes are protected forever." Evelyn held the envelope for a moment, feeling the weight of it in her hand. It wasn't the weight of a decision. It was the weight of freedom, of control, of a future that she had defined on her own terms. She smiled at Linda. "Thank you. For everything." Later that afternoon, after the event planning had settled into motion and the last few details were sorted, Evelyn found herself in the park, sitting on her favorite bench under an old oak tree that had watched over the city for generations. The air was still fresh from the rain, the sky clearing in soft blue layers, the clouds now breaking apart. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool breeze brush across her face. It wasn't just the rain that had passed. It was the storm of the past, the years of silence, the years of fighting battles that weren't hers to fight. Bethany and James had stayed behind at the house, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt truly alone. Not lonely, but alone in the best way possible. For once, she was no longer defined by the family she had tried to save, or the failures that had been thrust upon her. She was defined by the choices she had made, the strength she had found, the people she had protected, and the community she had helped to rebuild. The wind shifted gently, the clouds clearing further, and Evelyn smiled softly to herself. The warmth of the sun spread slowly across her face, filling her with a quiet sense of peace she hadn't known she'd been missing. She stood slowly, dusting off her coat, and looked around. The park, the town, the city. It was all hers, in a way it had never been before. She was no longer standing in the shadows of the past. She was standing tall, in the sunlight. "They left me in the rain," Evelyn whispered to herself, the words no longer carrying the sting of betrayal. "But I stood tall in the sun,